We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Kelly France, Purpose and Culture Champion, Employee Communications, and Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at LinkedIn. Kelly, it's so good to see you. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah, hey Christina, thanks for having me. So great to chat with you. Kelly France, she, her pronouns. When I talk about myself, I always ground it in my core values, which are faith, authenticity, community, connection, contribution, compassion. That's a lot of C's, and freedom. And living a purpose-driven life is really important to me. And my personal mission is around empowering people and organizations to operate in purpose and really become the best, most authentic expression of themselves. So I fulfill this role of this mission in my role as a culture and purpose leader, leveraging the discipline and the power of communications to both protect and promote the reputations of large global organizations and really help them and their leaders across all levels connect with internal and external stakeholders. And so, as you mentioned, I currently lead employee communications for diversity, inclusion, and belonging at LinkedIn. And while I enjoy my work immensely in the communication field, I've built my career in that area, I'm also on a journey myself to really embrace the fullness of my gifts and really looking at how I can expand how I share those gifts in the world for maximum impact and personal fulfillment. So this includes my passion for psychology and human development. I'm actually training right now to become a therapist. I'm very interested in just how humans flourish, how they can become their best selves. And I'm currently in my final year of counseling training. So walking alongside people from across the lifespan in both individual and group settings, really on their journey to healing and achieving more optimal levels of well-being. I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm an auntie, love my nephews and my niece. She's newer to the crew, but she really is a blessing. I'm a friend, I'm a speaker, writer, and at my core, I'm a teacher. And then last but not least, a little bit about me, like I love being in nature, especially by water. It really helps bring me to life, honestly. Water is very healing for me. Traveling, swimming, singing, and spending quality time with people who are committed to really bringing the best out of each other. And when I wanted to be a kid, when I was a kid, honestly, I wanted to be a news reporter or a talk show host. I've always had strengths in communication, and those seem like very logical ways to use them. And as a kid, I was thinking about this. I used to love reading out loud. So I would read out loud as if I was at a news desk. Ask my family, they can verify this. And I did job shadow a few reporters at one point. It turns out I didn't like the actual lifestyle of a reporter. The idea of dropping everything to get the story was not really exciting for me, but the speaking and connecting part was. And so I've since learned that my real passion is around storytelling, which I've made a career in and continue to look at how to build upon outside of the corporate setting.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that context and a little bit about your journey to storytelling, to the many gifts that you have as well. And something that struck me in our conversation, especially before this kind of episode, was kind of the changing view that people have of the role of their 9 to 5 or their jobs in their lives, because that's not our only and not the identifier. As well as you were talking about, there's a lot of kind of passions that you have and you really fulfill in different ways. And I think that's important to the full person for, like, on this day in history, what is the role of your kind of primary job in your life right now?
Yeah, so research says that on average, the average person will spend about a third of their life working, and that's about 90,000 hours. So that is a long time and probably feels even longer if you're, unhappy at work. And so for me, work primarily provides, number one, economic opportunity to help me live the quality of life that I desire. It also provides a chance for growth and development. I mean, personally and professionally. Contribution and growth is part of my value system. And so, I enjoy that part of my work. And then last but not least, like the opportunity to build meaningful relationships with others and, be part of a mission that I really believe in. And I feel like I can share my gifts to help advance. I believe traditionally work has been a domain where people get a large sense of identity and connection. Um, but I think if tipped too far on one end, it can be dangerous. So, what happens if your job changes? Do you lose your identity? Who are you? And so roles change, but I'm a big believer that purpose and your why should maintain some level of consistency. And I'm learning, it's actually really healthy to have openness and a certain level of flexibility when you think about the how in terms of your career and just life in general, while remaining really committed to your overall mission. And, I'm really passionate about kind of deconstructing and disrupting this idea that we are what we do at work. I'm a firm believer. I've written LinkedIn posts about this. Work is a part of life. It doesn't equal life. And it's really interesting. There's a conversation happening right now around this term quiet quitting. Have you heard that, Christina?
Yes, I've been seeing it trending on LinkedIn and so on TikTok, a couple of different articles. Yes. Yeah.
For sure. And so I just want to address that because I think it's relevant to this question. You know, First of all, I think the term is flawed in terms of the name is really misleading because it's not about quitting. And it irritates me because the phrase is putting the blame on employees and not looking at the flaws within organizational systems. But, I do like how the spirit of the phrase is really shining a spotlight on the need to enforce and encourage bold boundaries. So not quiet quitting, but it's around bold boundary setting. And, each of us is faced with decisions in life about where to place our energy, and our energy is a limited resource. And so, I'm learning and have learned like where we exert our energy should provide a return. And when it comes to work and career, we've been conditioned by capitalism to really believe that our workplaces deserve full access to every part of us and all of our discretionary effort without really questioning that. And sometimes without an even exchange. And, I think this consistent overextension is really has negative consequences to the individual. It causes burnout, it causes dis-ease. And so I'm really glad that, silver lining of this phrase, with its flaws and all, it's really highlighting that, the people who are being awakened from what I view as more of an exploitative notion that, that our work is our life, and actually embracing this power of no and bold boundary setting.
I love bold boundary setting and just like reading more about what quiet quitting is in terms of not doing 4 or 5 jobs and only being paid for one job, and really having that sense of self and really being able to say, okay, this is my job, it's really important, it's aligned with my personal values and my mission, but also it's not going to encapsulate who I am as a person, which is related to capitalism and the society that we are in today as well. In terms of those healthy boundaries, this is something that I have definitely been getting better at, and actually today seeing the flowers of that emerge as well. And you mentioned in another interview how people are actually drawn to folks who set those healthy boundaries. And I think that's important to recognize as well. Can you say a little bit more about what you kind of mean by that, or what you've seen happen there?
Yeah. So before I get to that, I do want to just talk about, well, first of all, I'm glad that you are finding, leaning into setting boundaries and reaping the benefits. That's amazing. I love to hear that. And I've been on my own journey on that process as well. But just my relationship to setting healthy boundaries, how it's changed over time. You know, at the core of it, organizations can't function without people, and people aren't machines. And, if we treat them as such, they will break down, and our teams and our businesses will suffer as a consequence. So I think sometimes we make it more complex than it needs to be. But my journey to setting boundaries really began with the realization that pouring from an empty cup was not working out well for me, and for those around me. I honestly didn't like who I was becoming with so much of my life and mind space occupied by work. And more than that, just the needs of others, building other people's dreams, being attached to other people's priorities. And even before the pandemic, something just wasn't sitting well with me. I said, I don't think I could keep this up for much longer. And I just began to interrogate just the system of how, it just seemed to be the way it was. And I was just like, something is not right about this. Then in 2020, you know, I sold my condo in the city, bought a home in the suburbs where I'm originally from. And, this was one of many intentional decisions that I made that was saying, I'm no longer going to design my life around work. And the truth is, I did this for years, choosing where to live based on where the office was located and, spending hours and hours and hours in traffic commuting. Like it's a no for me. Like it's not worth it anymore. And, I finally woke up to the fact that that return wasn't there. And it sparked such a greater sense of peace, of joy, and fulfillment in my life. And what I love about it, Christina, is it's opened up so many new possibilities on how I could really be in the driver's seat of creating the life that I desire and really thinking more holistically about how I share my gifts with the world, which includes, as I mentioned, going to grad school. Wasn't really a part of my plan, but around following my curiosity and saying, okay, this is possible. But also spending more time, quality time, just on self-care activities. I got healthier, thank goodness, during the pandemic. And I know it was a tough time for so many reasons, but my health actually improved. And so that's something I'm grateful for. And also just spending more time with people that I love the most. And I feel like the idea that collaboration only happens in person for every, diversity of working style is really an antiquated myth. Um, and I also think it's a pretty sad attempt at the capitalistic systems kind of exerting power and control over others. And I feel really grateful that I'm in a work environment where I'm trusted to work where is best for me. And, being assessed for output and not face time or other unfair means. And I think ultimately that helps me be more productive, as an employee. It fuels a greater sense of overall well-being as well. So everyone wins in that scenario. And I don't think anyone should be expected to be on at all times of the day and night for work, working on vacation. I've worked in a culture like that before, and it was pretty miserable. And, sure, there are emergencies where, we're going to need to lean in and help the team, not advocating not doing your job and making an impact. But I am a believer that like these fire drills, they should be few and far between. And if they're not, we're doing something wrong. And I've said this before, I'll say it again, like we're human beings, not human doings. And so we need times of rest and meaningful disconnection. And when we do this, the workplace and everything in our lives, and everything that our lives are connected to really improves. And I was reflecting, like my dad, he always tells me, Kel, don't confuse activity with accomplishment. That's what my dad says a lot. And I've really taken that to heart and adapted a bit as kind of a mantra that I use for my career, which is impact over activity. And it's a lens that I apply to my life. That it's not about how much you do, but it's the impact of what you're doing that really matters. And it takes a lot of discipline, Christina. I don't always get it right, but I definitely see the benefits of that. And I see the improvements in how I prioritize. And I really believe energy and capacity flow from empowering yourself to really drop people pleasing and prioritize the things that will really drive the greatest impact.
I love that. And I also think that you cannot prioritize everything and everybody as well, because then that's not priorities. It's just like eventually pouring from an empty cup, as you were talking about too. And I loved what you were saying about creating the life that you desire and really reflecting, taking a step back and recognizing, the activity of sending 500 emails is not an outcome as well. And we shouldn't be
Mm.
thinking about the optics. And also, I've heard and kind of read about in articles that quote unquote water cooler moments that we need or should have. And I'm just like, who are usually part of those conversations? Who's left out? Do we really need them? Probably not. So I definitely agree with you there too. And you've been really open about your journey, and I feel that a lot of folks have experienced burnout and coming to this point where you can't continue on as things always have been. How are you working towards kind of destigmatizing talking about one's not only like physical, emotional, but also mental health too?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I'll start with, are you familiar with the Enneagram by chance?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so for those of the listeners who aren't aware, it's a system of personality typing that really looks at and describes patterns and how we interpret the world and manage emotions. So I am an Enneagram 2, so I'm empathic, sincere, generous, altruistic, a big capacity for love for others when I'm operating at my best. But on the other end of that spectrum, at my worst, I'm really susceptible to having trouble acknowledging my own needs. And a former version of myself struggled a lot with people pleasing, especially when it came to the workplace. And as a Black woman living in America, like I've always felt like, honestly, that I've had to go above and beyond to prove myself in the world and the workplace. There's that saying, unfortunate saying, that Black people of color, work twice as hard for half as much. That's just part of what we do. And, this was seemingly, I say seemingly in quotes, working for me in the beginning of my career. But I started noticing that, I was working harder and delivering oftentimes greater impact than those around me at times, members of the majority. But they were the ones advancing. They were the ones being seen as leaders. And when it came to my career advancement, I lacked proper sponsorship, and experienced kind of this constant shifting of milestone markers to meet. I'd meet it or exceed it, and then the marker would shift. And it became very exhausting, Christina, to be quite honest. And it really created a root of bitterness and a lot of frustration within me. And it caused me to question my worth in a lot of ways, because I began internalizing things that were not really my burden to bear, but rather symptoms of the inherent racism that unfortunately still exists within many systems in our country, including corporate America. And so I finally began to really acknowledge the microaggressions and racism I dealt with in my career that, previously I kind of brushed off and just pushed through because that's what Black women do. We push through. But ultimately deciding to embrace my humanity as a person and as a Black woman, and realize that, I did not have to be strong all the time, even though society has conditioned me to show up that way. Embracing that was really one of the best boundaries, back to our conversation on boundaries, that I've set in my life. And, on top of the wounds, or, on top of this, and then I think about wounds from my past that I had not fully dealt with or addressed, my mental health really suffered. And I was experiencing deep sadness, hopelessness, loss of interest in things that, would before give me pleasure, bring me joy, a lot of social isolation, racing intrusive thoughts. Those are just a few things, but it was a really hard time. And on top of this, I actually had a lot of shame for feeling this way, as my life wasn't that bad. It could be worse. And, from the outside looking in, but my inner world was really under attack. And what I say, felt like my inner world was in shambles, quite frankly. So I was high functioning, as, in depression and anxiety for years, wearing a smile on the outside, screaming on the inside, secretly wishing someone would, notice and, help. But there came a point when those symptoms started interfering with kind of my daily tasks of life. And I knew I was not myself and I needed help. So I enrolled myself into an intensive outpatient program. I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression, and spent about 10 weeks fully dedicated to working on my mental health. Was able to uncover the root of some of my thinking patterns, experiencing kind of validation for my emotions for one of the first times in my life, versus judgment or shame for having emotions or feeling deeply. Making space to process my life while learning about skills like mindfulness and self-compassion, learning to give myself grace, same grace I extend to other people. We should be doing that for ourselves. Practicing gratitude, setting healthy boundaries. All these things were so helpful and contributed to a really critical turning point in my life. It was very challenging, but also one of the best gifts I could have given myself. And it's interesting because, this was before the pandemic, but little did I know, not too far after spending that dedicated time working on myself, I didn't know, COVID would hit and the racial reckoning of 2020 would hit. And while it's been, a very difficult time the past few years in our society, I also reflect, and I'm so grateful that I was able to get the support I needed before kind of the external environment got even more challenging. And so by the time that happened, I was much better equipped to respond versus react in more adaptive ways. And, I now know that nothing, like absolutely nothing, especially a job, is worth our mental health. And, I'm much better at focusing on what I can control now. Never perfect, but the improvements have been vast. Being more aware of the signals that my body and mind are sending me. So often we're operating on autopilot, Christina, and it's like what mindfulness does is teaches you to be present in the moment. And that includes listening to what your body is communicating, listening to what your thoughts may be communicating and your emotions, and being really radical and attending to, what I need. And the key is without apologies, which includes setting those bold boundaries and work, but also the energy that I choose to allow into my life. So that's a bit about my journey.
I really appreciate you sharing that and being really honest and kind of vulnerable about what you have learned throughout the years as well. And it's also exciting to hear that you had like really done the inner work and the kind of reflection to have some tools when the pandemic hit as well, to help others and also to kind of work through that too. What is your advice for other executives and leaders to really lead with that self compassion, self awareness that we've been discussing, and really intentional empathy?
Love this question. I really believe, Christina, we cannot give what we don't have. And so that's why leading with compassion in my book starts with learning how to be self compassionate to yourself. And if you look at the meaning of compassion, it literally means to suffer together. And, emotion researchers really define it as the feeling that arises when you're confronted with another suffering and feel motivated to relieve that suffering. And self compassion is extending that compassion to yourself, especially in instances of perceived inadequacy or failure or general suffering. And there's a researcher by the name of Kristen Neff, where she's a self compassion researcher, and she's done a lot of research in this field or in this topic area. And she defined self compassion as being composed of three main elements: self kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness, which I think is such a great definition. So that would be my advice for, leaders and execs in terms of learning this practice and building it into our leadership brand, because it really builds our capacity to engage with others from a place of empathy and compassion.
I feel like I have so many more questions for you, and I want to extend our time, but I want to make sure that, I want to pass the mic to you to share anything that I haven't specifically asked you, or for folks who are listening, what do you hope they kind of take away from our conversation today about, intentional living your values, work, like anything that we have discussed or not discussed?
Yeah, so I do wish we had more time, but I think I want to talk about this concept of multidimensionality. It's something that I'm really passionate about in terms of decoupling identity and worth from a job. This idea that we are truly more than what we do, and embracing our multidimensionality in terms of rejecting boxes that people, and let's be honest, sometimes we ourselves put ourselves in. And I really firmly believe, is kind of manifested in my journey, that we're more than just one thing. And life is really about embracing learning and growth and following your curiosity and really being open to where it leads us. So it's really about nurturing the fullness of who we were created to be. And I enjoy my work and enjoy making a positive impact, in those spaces where, I choose to share my gifts. And the workplace is one of those spaces in this season. But, I think my purpose and mission, I think of it as much more expansive than one thing, and fully embracing the fact that I am also more than one thing has been really empowering. And I have a passion for helping more people become awakened to this, to really unlock greater levels of fulfillment, joy, and impact in their lives. So that would be my encouragement to everyone, is just to think about your life more holistically and be open to where the journey might take you, and be open to it maybe looking different than you thought. That's been my story in a nutshell. Is life doesn't look like I thought it would, but it's still been a blessing.
Expanding the definition of you, your interests, your gifts, and really I love the idea of decoupling that from your job as well, and really taking time to look inward and really take care of yourself as a human being, not a human doing. I think that's the term that you said that I really appreciated, like thought about as well. Kelly, thank you so much for taking the time to be on reimagining company culture and sharing your journey, and also your experience with us here today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Christina.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening, at All Voices, we really believe in employees and employers being seen, heard, and understood, and know it's a requirement for the business to succeed overall. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.